3, where we start. Before was Kumbuzo, and then we take 4. It's Kumbuzo and the brother, and then Zen and Musa. Just, I don't want to lose that because I didn't note it. I didn't want to talk about who are you writing for. Is there a particular audience? Maybe something can debate. But what also seems troubling for me in most cases, and listening to you, we don't have references within the field of visual arts of black writers. We tend to go quickly to literature, which is understandable, because literary scholars and writers, they write. But there are writers in visual arts, which I'll name 3 for you. One, for example, there's a book called Echoes of African Art by Manaka, which is not even in a curriculum. Why is that the case? And this book was produced at a very beautiful moment in the late 80s, right? 1987, it precedes even Sue Williamson's book, Resistance Art. It precedes even the book that is celebrated, Stephen Sachs's Neglected Tradition. It precedes Gavin Young's project on township art. That era, yet that book is not featured. And Manaka makes some of the claims and questions the issues of what you call the township art there. But very seldom that book is discussed. That's one. Even before Manaka, there are the likes, for example, of Tamim Nyele, whose writings. Of course, they are not sustained writing, but there are moments of his papers and conferences, even his review, for example, one beautiful review on Bongi Hlongo's works. Why we are not debating this? Even prior Nyele, there's also Selbin Vusi, who's now coming back. There's a book by Elsa Miles on Selbin Vusi, who was so articulate that if you read him, you listen to him. He was an educator, from South Africa, went to study in America, and when Sharpeville happened, he decided not to come back, but to go to Zimbabwe, and from Zimbabwe, I think he went to Kenya, but also in Ghana. He died in exile. Isn't also our responsibility as writers, as black scholars, to kind of revisit this work and bring it into the fore, as we do when we talk about what you call it, masters, whether it's Sekoto, whether it's Ernest Mangoba, and so forth and so forth. There's also a pool of very interesting writing that parallels the visual arts, especially in theater. So we always fall easy. One figure I would like us also to think, for example, David Colan, who's been quiet and who's been writing since the 80s. How often do we cite this work? How often do we make use of this work? Are there things that we can recuperate from their writings? So that was something I didn't want to lose, yeah.
Okay, so for me, it boils down to the question of accessibility, as you know. Because a lot of the time you are in the academy and then you do your masters and all that stuff, you realize that there's little reference basically to tap into, especially black writers. But also for me, then the question is, at what point do we self-organize in terms of publishing, whereby we are able to collate all these stuff, all these writers, but we are able to, as black writers or scholars, art critique, where there's a platform where we don't get frustrated by the institution. Because also the institution then, we always talk about the institution as if it isn't a human, because it's like a structure, as we're saying. But I think then what mechanisms are in place, because also I'm always like thinking that spaces such as the Market Photo Workshop, right, whereby they produced a lot of black artists, and who is writing about black photographers, right? Who is vesting time in terms of writing about the kind of a scholarship that is coming specifically within the space? Because also it's historical. So I think then, for me, it's at what point do we start to shift, whereby we do recognize the historical event, like the problem and all that stuff, also political and economical, we acknowledge these things. But at the same time, for me, is at what point do we then start to shift and self-organize within, because also for me, when we talk about like this thing of how really, at what point do we start then to see the works of your work, for instance, like accessibility to that, but also like what is the responsibility? Who am I as a black practitioner interested? who am I in conversation with, basically. Because I think it shifts how we think about the practice, but also it shifts ways in which our work is written. Because also one of the frustration is that a lot of black writers, or rather black practitioners, especially post-South Africa, we find that when a white critique would review your work, there's always an issue of like you being misinterpreted basically in what your content is all about. So I think we need to invest much more time basically in sort of organizing ourselves in terms of like what is it that we want to be seeing happening.
Thanks, Kura. For other speakers, can you try also just to be brief and punchy so that we can have opportunity for many.
Okay, thank you. Fantastic presentation and for your insight as well that you provided. Funzo. My name is Funzo from the Tsotsi University of Technology. Two questions. One, avenues of self-publishing. Are black writers exploiting those opportunities, as he has mentioned? Self-publishing, which you find more and more white writers also kind of going into that sphere in order to avoid the problems with kind of institutions. And then secondly, the point that you raised, Thembinkosi, about the people in institutions, right? The kind of gatekeepers. What about the black academics in institutions? So what has been their role and responsibility as black writers?
My question follows from both of these questions, and it is about, okay, the university is a shitstorm that has a particularity to itself, but I'm more interested in fleshing out what you guys think about publishing and galleries. I mean, you just go to the art fair. Like, are there no black publishing spaces in South Africa? Self-publishing is one thing, but what about the platforms for publishing that are black owned? You know, Muna has got a thing going, but galleries are also incredibly white spaces. So the question, the question I have is whose responsibility is that? Because there's a danger of then asking writers and artists to take the space of gallerists and publishers, which is probably not, I mean, there are implications for that. So that's the one thing. The other thing is it simply a matter of getting black academics into spaces, getting black publishing houses set up and black galleries set up? Or is it a question of fundamentally rethinking and critically challenging what academia, publishing or galleries are?
After Musa, then we respond and we'll take a round of two. I've noted Muntu and Quiz. After Musa.
I've got this term that you just spoke about briefly, the duality of the psyche, that just got stuck in me, and I'm interested in finding out how does it impact your process and your final product. If you can just speak about that largely.
Okay. Again, I said at the beginning that when I started writing, I was going through like an emotional kind of roller coaster, existential space. And it was very negative space. It was a very, I needed an outlet, to vent that out, the anger that I was bottling up. Art, in a way, like, is a catharsis for me. You know, it relaxes me. So I get a facility when I go to the exhibition, like to relinquish all negative energy. And to get the kind of, in a way, the magic that art is supposed to be, where it's about aesthetic value or aesthetic beauty, and I believe in in this kind of like healing effect of it, you know. And it just started me writing a lot. I started in 2014, and I tried to write like 2 pages a week or 3 pages a week, and it's coming to the space right now. I like that question. You know, that's part of how it informed my process. In terms of galleries and publishing, like, I'm from Cape Town, so there's very little communication between galleries and writers. I've tried communicating with some galleries, especially the galleries that I've written articles that have been published on platforms. Still, I mean, there's always silence, and I always bring it to it's a professionalism issue, maybe because they are mainly a gallery, so like publishing really is not something that's like primary for them. So I always tend to move on, and again, in terms of facilities or strategies for self-publishing, in May or April this year, I started a blog, and my blog again is I try to be not to be kind of emotionally involved in the things I write about, because I don't want to taint my writing with kind of historically held anger of black people. I want to be an objective writer that tries to bring out the value of the aesthetic goals of the artworks. That's what basically what those are my creative goals. I mean, in terms of academics that I've interacted with, I studied the UWC and I graduated in 2006. Then I surveyed my interaction with the university through practice. I was a member of Co-Collective, and that basically kind of introduced me into the art arena in Cape Town and in South Africa. And I think there are things that I've written that I've sent to my former lecturers, and they always maintain the attitude of, you know, like the lowly student, you know, the lowly black student, and even now at this point where I have work that's been published professionally and it's in the public sphere, I still get that kind of attitude from them, you know. So it's again, it's, you know, part of this idea of this ideological scheming that maybe some people are inadvertently like perpetuating, but sometimes because, you know, like of other people's backgrounds, it does feel like a deliberate and kind of insidious perpetuation of that.
Okay. Before I will give to Muntu and Kwesi, I just want to pick up, yes, I agree, and of course Muna is one of the sustaining galleries in the pool in the White Sea, but also there have been other galleries, for example, Thandi, CBC, there was a moment Sami they did. It's not easy, that market, because there you need patronage in terms of the economics. And I see similar kind of patterns when it comes to publishing, because you need money to commission writers, you need money for photography of quality reproduction. Yes, the online, it works, like the blog and all of that, but also there's some kind of prestige with the actual magazine. That's why Art South Africa has been one of the valuable sources. That's why, for example, let's say Nga has been one of the great sources internationally. Same with TEDx, we can list. But what I do believe as a problem, I take responsibility for that problem. For some of us who've taught, it seems we have continued a pattern of producing practitioners than shifting attitude in terms of people who are going to write out of the academy. Because every year we produce makers. Same year with photo workshop, that they come up with photographers, and many Musa, great photographers. But what I don't think we have done strategically, although some of us have tried to encourage other people to shift attention away from making, you know, the likes of Bavisha or Poshia, to see that there's artistry, there's something else. But we have not deliberately designed a program where we can produce writers, whether they are critics or they are art historians. But it's exciting now when you see the likes of Tsotsis and also artists and so forth and so forth. Some have been writing, but I don't think for those of us who've been teaching, we have designed a program, you know, so that we not only encourage students to make things, but we encourage students to write about these things. Like now, for example, curating has become fashionable. You know, everyone is a curator, which is great, but still, the gap between the curator and artist, which is supposed to be a writer, is still, even the curators themselves, they write less. Without criticizing them, you know, as a woman, God was writing, but she writes less than now making shows. Where usually we get these write-ups is either in catalogs of exhibition. So I think that's where again my point I was making about the institution, that it's not only the building, it's also us, the humans who have an opportunity to teach, meaning that we need to become imaginative as well as practical enough to say, yes, it's no longer that ghost or that white person now, because we are there in these institutions. As few as we are, as minor as we are, but we are inside there. So it's a question of what we make of those avenues. That's why the likes of Nga, because when Okwi designed that, it was not even part of the university, but of course it was in conversation with the likes of Salah and Olu, then they said Nga, and they brought, if you read Nga area, even writers, I'm sorry, artists like Godfrey Donge, they were writing, they were not only asking art historian to write. So I'm saying, I think we need to learn from this model. That's why I was using even Tamim Nyene, for example. These are just limited. That was one that I wanted to make as a comment, that yes, we need also to take responsibility. That's why I'm saying, for some of us who have taught, Muntu and Quiz.
Yeah. You touched on like the post-predetermined state of a black writer, And my brother, you were talking about transformation, I mean, being a South African and having worked for about 15 years in a transforming state, I don't know, do you think transformation is possible? Because, should we still be, as blacks in this country, be talking transformation, or should we be talking ownership? And then Zen touched on this, the spaces. There's been a number of black people who have gone out to create spaces, but these spaces don't last. They crash prematurely. Do you maybe, because the problem is the spaces are white owned, and the black narrative is washed down, is misinterpreted, but then what is it that every black space that has been popping up crashes? And then the role of academics, some of the academics here, some of the people sit in advisory boards in government and all those. And how is it consultations whereby it's just about wine or whatever? Why isn't there like real change on the ground? Why is the art fair still as the way it is, whereas we have amongst some of the people that we look up to who are radical in language and as far as blackness is concerned and progressiveness, not just over books and stuff, but they have the views and their views are in line with a guy who wants land, But what is it like? Are these kind of talks just like talk shops, and we are gonna come back again next year and talk about
I wanted to say two things, but suddenly I want to respond to Muntu. The symposium, part of the work of the symposium, we hope, is that we begin to acknowledge the thinking that is currently happening in South Africa. Because it's not as though, because Musa is a practitioner, he does not think. There is a thinking behind it, and part of what we try to do is to coax out what people are doing, because part of the reason why we went to Walter Sisulu University is because we want to find out what's going on there. We never hear about it here in Johannesburg anyway. So we want to find out what's going on. Part of the reason why we're here at the Market Photo Workshop instead of Wits University or UJ is because we want to find out what's going on here. What's the thinking that's going on here? So for me, it's an issue also of making sure that as we are thinking, we are also documenting our thought processes. And we do not have to wait until a great black South African writer or an equivalent of a Louis Nkosi or a Njabulani Ndebele emerges out of art history or South African art history. No, I can take Samuel Mdluli's writings, dispersed as they are across publications, put them together and say, what is the thread that goes through this writing? How can I distill that into a form of scholarship, into a form of coherent knowledge? How can I take Goniwe's writing, dispersed as it is, bring it together into a form of coherent body of knowledge, etc., etc. We do not have to allow our condition to prevent us from thinking. And again, one of the things that I have constantly been saying or trying to say throughout this conference is that there is a level to which one has to engage with the everyday challenges of just existing. But there is also an elevated state of reflection through which you now try to distill certain ideas and put them together. And there's always, I feel, a push or a tendency to say, because I'm a practitioner, I must stay in practice. And because I'm not a curator, I must not curate. Because I'm not a writer, I must not write. In fact, I don't consider myself a writer either. I'm a bureaucrat for all intents and purposes. But because I recognize a need for something to happen, I step in there, I fall, I pick myself up, I get other people to help me, like the black mark. I sometimes send my writing to Goniwe. Hey Goniwe, what do you think of this thing? Before I send it to the editor, and he says, no, tighten up there and there and there and there. So this is how we help each other out. So I think this is the kind of economy, and I mean, it does seem like it's repetitive, we are complaining about the same things. But I think in that process, we are trying to actually do the work of trying to distill these ideas so that in 2-3 years' time, a student entering Wits University does not have to look and say, who are my references, and end up referencing people like Anitra and those people.
Thank you, President Muntu.
I mean, I think I understand your ambivalence. You know, and it is about, you know, I think your ambivalence is about getting like the art community in South Africa like engaging like itself in a very intense and coherent way, and I think part of the problem also was the texts you mentioned, like Managa and Tami Miyabe's works, like those works don't occupy a space in the collective imagination of the art industry in South Africa, where they are like a primary text or like a historical text. And that's part of the reason for that. It's not because of the way practice is structured or the attitudes of the people. It's the historical is a historical paradigm that's perpetuated by the institution or the university. And how then do we come up with strategies where those kind of texts actually act as guide for someone like me who's starting out as a writer, and actually I have that problem of the audience. The audience is how will the audience perceive my language? Does my language reflect my audience? So it's important for those texts to occupy a kind of a canonized space. How can we do that? There can be strategies that can be put in place that for those kind of texts to be diffused in the popular imagination. And I think my brother Musa, I think his question or his statement is a copyright issue, but also it might be like a symbolic space also question. It always has an impact if it has a context where it's like, especially when it comes to writing about art, there's already this invested power in it that is about breaking attitudes and stereotypes and like making different kind of connections that are not just about binaries between past and present, or white writers, black artists, white artists. There are other kind of hurdles that need to get over as the art community in South Africa. That has to do with the historical perception of text, not just artists, but also writing about art.
It's Sunday today, and yeah, so some of us have to go to church. But I just want to wrap it with two comments. Yes, Muntu, these like sound talk shops, but one of them I've learned being part of the ins and outs of university. It is out of this talk shop that you think, as Chris was saying, it is out of this talk shop that you learn. When someone come and present like this beautiful presentation, that you realize people do take time to research and package and present it and be dialogue. It might seem it's going to end here. No, don't believe. Don't underestimate the impact of that. And it is also in this talk shop, in these universities, when visitors come and speak, that you get students inspired to begin to also follow those trends. It is also in this talk shop that we begin to learn, as Jess Baldwin said, we break bread. What we are going to do with that, it rests with an individual. And Quez is right, we need to keep these talking shops going, because without us talking to each other, we are going to lose in touch. It's not enough just to put shows, exhibitions. That's why you need to accompany them either with series of lectures, with talkabouts, and panel discussions, so that we reflect on ideas, we share our ideas, we frame our ideas, we contextualize our ideas, we give historical account, and we critique those ideas through this talk shop. But also it is my wish, as Chris have said, that out of these, some of the writing, sometimes that's what the university has been good to do, especially the American Academy, that out of seminars and conferences, they produce publications. And that outlive that moment. And that's what catalogs have been so useful for, or about, is that the exhibition will be 3 months there or 3 weeks, but the catalog becomes a transporter of that and the ideas. So that's what I'm hoping with this kind of talk shops, that there will be a following up of write-ups, whether the papers that are presented or any other kind of forms, so that we can also reflect on our own ideas. So, and for me, the responsibility goes back to what Tsotsi has opened up of the writer, because we cannot complain anymore about the making, the invisibility of makers. Yes, we are not yet Kenrich and Goldblatt, but there's plenty of artists making work. Now we have curators, younger, established, and so forth, but also we need now to encourage that sphere or that realm of writing practices, writing discourses, whether it's in in discourses of teaching practice, or as an artist or a theory, I don't know. That for me is very important. And one last point I want to make, my observation, for example, even after Google TV, it's so interesting when I went back to VAS to teach part-time, how many collectives are there? Students are forming collectives. These things, yes, they appear as trends, but these are discourses that we need to also begin to theorize. We begin to discuss, because the fact that 3 women put up a collective in their 3rd, 4th year, it's a lot, whereas in our time it was always about me in class and get out. And Collective came out of those kind of conversation we had. Look at now, Collective have not only, it produced the likes of Kimang, it's Ati, it's Tsotsi, it's Kani. Those individuals are moving, and I think that becomes important. You know what I mean? So what I'm encouraging is that these talk shops are not only we're not only coming to cough and fart, but also we're trying to plant the seed. Having said that, I just want to thank Tsotsi and also thanks the audience. Thank you to the organizers of